security and innovation. And to moderate this discussion, we have Anna Rovzar, who has years of experience herself in the energy sector and now moderates conversations with leaders shaping Europe's clean energy transition. And so along with Anna, please welcome her panelists to the stage, who are Markus Rauramo, President and CEO of Fortum, President of Euroelectric as well, Jean-Christophe Laloux, Director General, Head of EU Lending and Advisory Operations at the European Investment Bank, Niclas Davidsson, CEO of Meva Energy, Dorota Zawadzka-Stępniak, President of the Polish National Fund for Environmental Protection and Water Management, and Francesco Gattei, Chief Transition and Financial Officer at Eni.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for the kind introduction. Excellencies, distinguished guests, good afternoon, and welcome to this panel on Europe's energy transition. We're coming to you live from the EIB Forum right here in the heart of Luxembourg. Warm welcome to everyone here in the room and also to those who are joining us online. Now, this EIB Forum looks at a strong Europe in a changing world. And there can be no doubt about the central role that energy plays within that strong Europe. Because Europe's energy transition, we've heard it in the opening remarks this morning, is in full swing, make no mistake. But we're increasingly going from one phase to the next, from a phase of setting targets and ambitions to now a phase of system delivery, of investment, of implementation, and of course of infrastructure. And to set the context a little bit, there are a few drivers at play here. The first is electrification. In the words of the International Energy Agency, the age of electricity is here. Power demand in Europe is up, expected to grow. Electrification is too, as data centers, electric vehicles, heat pumps, and a whole host of other technologies come online. And that power is increasingly coming from renewables. But second, the infrastructure meant to get us that power from where it's produced to where it is consumed is going in variable directions, and some of it is outdated. 40% of Europe's grids are older than 4 decades. So they need to be modernized, digitalized, expanded, and made more resilient too when it comes to new challenges, cybersecurity, extreme weather events and the impacts of that, peak demand. We have a range of different aspects also in other technology challenges. I've forgotten a few, but we'll get to that. That's why we're here with the panel. And then third, electrons is one part of our energy system. Molecules is another. And here, what happens in that space, in the decarbonization journey, in our clean energy transition is vastly important as well. So that means investment, it means infrastructure, it means talking about the financial architecture to get that all done. So what better place than the EIB Forum to discuss all that? And certainly no better company to be discussing that with than our panelists here today. So thank you for being here. And I would like to kick us off with a bit of a risk assessment together. We know there's many risks that energy infrastructure in Europe faces today: permitting, security of supply, capital allocation, plenty. But I would love to hear it from you, from your vantage point, each of you, just to get us started. What do you think is the single biggest risk, if you were to pick just one, facing Europe's energy infrastructure today? Markus, I want you to start us first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Well, you mentioned actually many of the risks already. So I see that the potential to deploy new capital to generate the energy, it is there, and that can be done. The bottleneck is how to get it to the right places, so grid infrastructure.
Grid infrastructure. Okay, great. We'll build on that point as we come further. Jean-Christophe, if I can go to you.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I'll pick one. If I have to pick one, it will be the fragmentation of the European electricity market landscape at the moment. And I picked this one specifically because the system dynamics are changing from a variable cost system to a fixed cost system. And in such a system, the fact that we optimize locally is really going to cost us a lot of money, and in the end will not help us solve the affordability issue that we have in Europe. So fragmentation it is.
Okay, from grids to fragmentation of that electricity landscape. Dorota, can I ask you for your risk?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. And of course, the first point is the the grid modernization and grid development. And the second one, of course, is the energy storage. I mean, we have to build a system of the big-scale energy storage, also in terms of energy, electricity, but also in terms of heating. And the second point, which I have to mention already at the beginning, is that we have to build a resilient infrastructure. I mean, we have this discussion in the previous panel. We have to have our infrastructure resilient to the floods, to the high temperature, and so on and so on. So really the new ecosystem, new model of the building of infrastructure in terms of energy system.
Right, what is that infrastructure going to look like, as resilient as possible to one of the few challenges you mentioned there? May I go to you, Niclas, please?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, the IB, for having me here as well. So I'd like to move the perspective a little bit to the most recent events we've seen in the world. This was mentioned already earlier today. LNG prices in the Dutch TFF hub are up with almost 80% in a few days. We are back in a situation where we were in 2022 with potentially a gas crisis. We can't neglect the fact that Europe is extremely dependent on imports of fossil gas. We have now, happily, must say, decided to ban imports from Russia. Nobody wants to import from the United States now, of course, but we are set to do that. And now we also have the issue in the Middle East. So we mustn't forget about the importance of this dependency and the need for Europe to move away from those dependencies.
Right, thank you for mentioning, of course, these are very rapidly developing events, and so the impact geopolitically then on our energy realities is here with us in the room. Thank you for that. Francesco, may I go to you for your risk?
Thank you, I'm the last one. And thank you to all the attendees. For me, it's the immaturity of the infrastructure. It's a paradox. You mentioned there is a very old infrastructure, but this infrastructure were built with completely different logic. Were built, I'm speaking about molecules, with an assumption of flows coming from east to west, and now these flows is clearly impacted by the Ukraine invasion, by the Russian war, and assuming a certain, let's say, structure of the energy mix based on central big plants of power with nodes that distribute around this. And now we are building instead an infrastructure that is related to diffused production capacity. So both sides, the molecules, the electrons, are built with wrong flows, without redundancy, without diversification, with limited storage. Think what, for example, is available in the Northern Europe in terms of storage, extremely low, because there was no need. There was a UK North Sea, and there was Groningen. You don't need to build storage capacity or large storage capacity. Germany is very small for its need in terms of gas capacity. And as Spain has demonstrated, even the new energy coming in are created a potential disruption if not managed through right infrastructure and battery solutions. This means that the reason is an immature system.
So we have the challenge of the grids front and center, and we'll pick up on that in the time we have together, both in terms of resilience and also maturity of infrastructure, whether on electron side or molecule side, the fragmentation of that electricity reality, the geopolitical aspect of this, and then how we just make it all more resilient, more future-proof. So we have quite a bit to unpack. Markus, can I ask you to start us off with that? Because you're CEO and president of Fortum, but also the president of Eurelectric. Speak to us a bit about the future power mix backbone that we see developing in Europe, more particularly from the Nordics point of view, because you know them like no other, of course. What have been some of the lessons learned there that can help us create that future-proof and future landscape from your perspective?
Thanks. A couple of angles there, and I thought that I'll make this really practical, so hands-on, like customer-driven examples. So to give you the context of Fortum, we have about 9.5 gigawatts of hydropower and nuclear power, a little bit of wind, 200 hydropower plants, nine nuclear reactors. What we see is that we have a massive customer pipeline from steel, aluminium, hydrogen derivatives, chemicals, data centers, battery factories who are looking at the Nordics as a place to locate their businesses. So then the question, how will that be supplied? Of course, primarily from our existing capacity, but going forward, we have identified what the customers need and when they need it. So how we are as a company preparing is that we are developing new clean megawatt hours to the extent customers need them. And through that, we have now 8 gigawatts of solar and wind under development in permitting, and more in earlier stages. Well, obviously, as we heard already, intermittent renewables are not enough. So customers need some profile, maybe even full load profile. So this has to be complemented with flexible assets, flexible production, storage, and demand response. So we have 2.5 gigawatt target to bring new flexibility online. In addition to that, the renewables will not be enough if the European demand grows as much as we are expecting. So in addition to this, we are also developing new nuclear, both large conventional plants and SMRs. So these all are in the pipeline. This is what the future will look like. More intermittent energy combined with flexibility, with storage, potentially even new nuclear. One point I thought of bringing here as well is that about the speed of how to get to market. So what can we do to speed up things? Well, we identified with our customers that what they need is sites, access to grid, and power. And about 10 years ago, we started to develop generic sites that could fit many of our customers. And through that, we have, for example, found Microsoft, who is now building a data center cluster in the capital region in Finland. And we have agreed to do the world's largest heat offtake from these plants. Through this site development, we have now 5 gigawatts of powered land that we can offer to our customers, and a big part of it right away. So this is one way to go around the slowness in permitting and getting sites zoned. You pre-plan them, and then customers can come faster. But this is the future, so intermittency combined with flexibility and also stable power.
So would you say that's the recipe, let's say, that was applied within the Nordics, and that really can now serve as a transferable lesson learned for the rest of the continent? Is that a carbon copy?
Yeah, so some of the lessons from the Nordics is that okay, the Nordics are now practically CO2 free, but that was not the case always. So even in Fortum, we had gigawatts of coal-fired capacity in the Nordics. But with the determined policies of the governments, this has been phased out completely and replaced with renewables and with both flexibility in production, but also flexibility in consumption. One key lesson from a Euroelectric point of view for the continent is that as an electricity industry, we are extremely keen to mobilize capital and technology for our customers' benefit. That is the best thing in the world. That is what companies really love to do, build new things. So we have increased our customer intimacy. We arrange continuously roundtables with our customers, meet them, ask that what is it that you need, and answer that. But a key thing there is bankability. So what we need is a bit of visibility from our customers as an industry. Again, 3,500 utilities across Europe. A bit of visibility through PPAs with our customers, shorter or longer term. And where the governments, but also EIB can step in, is risk sharing and making contracts bankable. So a tripartite approach. Customers, us as utilities, and then governments and governmental institutions who have the ability to absorb and manage and warehouse long-term risk.
So you show it can be done. Also that this is all about focusing on building new things. So a lot of optimism within that, to echo what was said in the opening remarks of this morning, and that bankability is absolutely key. Also to get the intermittent and flexible storage online and accompany all of this. So a lot is already put in motion there. Jean-Christophe, can I turn to you? to complement this from the investment point of view of EIB's home perspective. We heard your president this morning say EIB finances half of all grid reinforcement projects going on in Europe right now, a vast majority of, a vast amount of solar projects, also in wind. Speak to us a bit about the capital that's being made available, earmarked even, for energy infrastructure in the few years ahead, in the medium term.
Okay. First, if you allow me just to
Absolutely.
go back on the impressive figures you just gave, as saying safe for everyone in every power-hungry part of the economy to move to the Nordics, which I don't think everybody will want to do, no offense. We are going to have to find a way to also channel some of this energy in an incredible source of long-term additional energy development, to find a way to distribute that efficiently across Europe. And therefore, I wanted to echo on the main risk that I was talking about, and the fact that at the moment it's great to know that a lot is planned. I just put a question mark out there. Are we sure that we are planning optimally? And that we are going to make best use of everybody's competitive advantage in developing this additional capacity. Now, to your point, Anna, it is true that everybody can see a lot of investments need to go to the energy sector. Around 3 or 4 years ago, the European Investment Bank was financing around 10 billion euros roughly per year in the energy sector. We have nearly tripled, and you gave some of the stats of last year. Why have we done this? Because we all realize that there's a problem of affordability in Europe, most of all, a problem of competitiveness linked to the competitiveness of our economy, and now is the time when the game is played. Now is the time where we try to move the needle, and we are starting to see that the needle is really moving in a number of areas. Now, when you step back and you look a little bit ahead, energy investments should nearly double in the next decade or so. We should go from around 250 billion euros currently to, some say, up to 600 billion euros. Right, and of that, you can say 3 big chunks. One is energy production. I mean, you just talked about this, around 150 to 200 billion euros a year of additional energy production. 2, a lot on the demand side, and we don't talk very often about the demand side measures, but it is really important that we continue to talk about it. Renewable energy production is one thing, but on the demand side, we need to improve on energy efficiency a lot. And 3 is on infrastructure. That sits roughly in the middle for around 70 to 90 billion euros, depending on the figures that you take a year. So on the production, renewable energy production side, we are going to continue to hyper boost, and this is actually where most of the demand is coming. It's actually quite in line with what you just said. We see a very continuous demand for more long-term EIB finance on the energy production side. We have a number of supply-side measures that we have implemented recently, the wind package. We need to help also our European industry to produce more, also on the cable side, on the transmission side. We don't have enough capacity, so there are a number of supply-side measures that we need to continue to implement. So we are roughly going to remain around the same speed in the coming 1 to 3 years. On the demand side of things, I think it's probably, I would say, at least from our point of view, the parent pauvre, so the bit of the forgotten child out there. We have very little demand coming for the decarbonization of the heavy industry. Remarkably, in the 30 billion euro financing that we have provided last year, I would be at pain to give you more than 2 examples for decarbonization of the heavy industry. And we have also difficulty to scale up our efforts into energy efficiency. We have launched a few pilots, and some of them have been announced recently with Bertrand Picard, who is here today, also Solar Impulse. We're trying to develop energy as a service, to try to, to develop these models where the energy savings finance actually the investments, but it's small scale, and we have a lot of difficulty progressing on this. So I guess there we have to start scratching our heads and thinking, okay, are there new mechanisms like blending, for example, that we could potentially use to progress? And we must do more. And finally, on the infrastructure, I mean, we talked a lot about it. Grids, super important, and I'm sure everybody will agree to this. Our infrastructure needs to be improved. I think there, the main bottleneck will be what do we do to help the transmission system operators and the distribution system operators to overcome the natural financial barriers that they have and the fact that they're already quite leveraged, and how do we finance and explore new financing models, off-balance sheet, project finance, other types of structures to allow them to do more, actually, because not everything can be financed on balance sheet. So maybe I'll have the opportunity to come back to this later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thank you for laying this out. The EIB has increased its focus on energy infrastructure over the past few years. And now really looking at the demand side, the generation side, of course, and infrastructure too. So let's come back to that on how that will go forward in the years to come. Dorota, if I might come to you. We hear from the electron side, of course, we hear from the investment side. The government perspective is absolutely front and center here too. You represent Poland's largest institutional funding actor here. And a lot of what we're asking for to deal with those risks, ultimately are member state driven, are country driven. Speak to us a bit about the government perspective here and also your role as a fund to advance that agenda on infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And yes, indeed, my institution for nearly 37 years finances different type of projects, not only, of course, from the transformation, and once we started, we financed different type of projects in terms of sustainable development, in terms of wastewater, in terms of also waste modernization installations. But now we are absolutely sure, and 80% of the budget coming from European budget, also from the modernization fund, and thank you very much for supporting us in also this challenge. I mean, this 80% of funds coming from the energy transformation. But how I understand energy transformation, and I fully agree with what you said, I mean, it's absolutely the development of new capacities in terms of production. And we are supporting renewables. We are supporting renewables in terms of energy sector, but we are also supporting renewables in heating sector and also in industry. I mean, there is no net zero goals in terms of Polish conditions without all the sectors being on board. And second one, we also support a lot of projects, a lot of programs dedicated to the energy efficiency in terms of buildings, in terms of industry, in terms of transport. We know that the cheapest energy is that one which has never been produced. And we really want to, to make this goal as a goal in terms of net zero. And the third one, which is also crucial, and as I mentioned at the beginning, in terms of grids. Especially in Poland, once the new installations in terms of onshore, offshore wind farms, in terms of new nuclear power plants, which is ongoing in the north part of Poland, we know that a lot of new grids should be developed, and also a lot of new grids should be also replaced. So the third part, which is also under our agenda, is also dedicated to grids, as I mentioned, also energy storage. But I have to also mention something which we very often not touch in this sort of discussion. We are discussing the infrastructure, we are discussing the financing, and I fully agree also with you said the risk sharing in terms of new infrastructure being developed. But what we very often not touch is the social aspect of the transformation. I truly believe that we will not have the really transformation in Europe, also transformation in Poland, without the social support in terms of actions, in terms of new capacities, but also in terms of changing the social patterns, in terms of also production of energy at the local level. So the social part is also crucial. And really the last point which I wanted to mention in this intervention is that I also believe that the institution like mine, which distributes public funds, newly public funds, as I mentioned, cohesion policy funds, recovery and resilience facility, also modernization fund, Norwegian funds, a lot of external, I would say, funds. These funds should be spent, should be disbursed to high-risk projects. These projects which will never be been allocated or never been produced without the public support. That's why in our new strategy we start to support innovations, innovative projects, and we really want to, to see this as a role of the public fund, public institution like mine.
Thank you for that, Dorota. Markus, I believe you wanted to comment briefly.
Yes, if I can pick on Dorota's excellent point about the social patterns and the social impact. So definitely this is a big thing for European citizens, but we also see it with customers, like B2B customers. And my point there is that on the back of what I mentioned, we all know what is happening. So more intermittent energy, more volatility, flexibility has a value. When we talk with our large B2B, like global B2B customers and ask them, what do you want? They all want clean, very low cost and stable energy. And if we ask them, do you want to be flexible? They say no. But if we say, okay, but how about if it's X% cheaper? Would you then flex? Okay, then there's a different discussion. So that's my point also with regards to the social acceptance for Europeans, that if we need to continuously and persistently explain what is going to happen, and then people are very smart. So citizens are extremely smart, and they will arrange their own life if they're given the parameters, if they're given the information that what is going to happen.
Please.
That's why it's so important to use the language of benefits for the civil servants,
Incentives,
for the societies,
yeah.
for the scientists, and so on. So really, this language of benefits, also in terms of the goals, not only economic goals, but also in terms of environmental goals, climate goals, because really everybody, probably all of us, want to live in a clean environment, breathe clean air, and really live to a nice and comfortable environment.
No, thank you so much for bringing in the just energy transition perspective to the panel, because it's vital and it's going to be important also for taking this forward. Maybe to continue on the energy system landscape here towards the molecule side of the story. Niclas, you were CEO of Swedish clean tech that invests in and heavily pushes next generation biogas. Tell us a bit about that part of the energy system and what solutions this will provide on the harder to abate and on the industrial side of energy use. Give us a sneak peek there.
Absolutely, thank you, Anna. So most of you probably haven't heard about Meva Energy before, and I'll just take the opportunity to say a couple of words about this company. So we are a Sweden-based green tech scale-up company, having developed a new method to produce biogas, a novel type of biogas production, as you say. And we address the hard-to-abate sector, in particularly the manufacturing industry that are heavily reliant on natural gas and LPG. On that question of yours, and also on the emphasis of the grids and power here, electrification, we need to remember that Europe is a big place. There will not be the same conditions in every part of Europe for a particular technology. Some places will be well fit for heavy electrification, other ones will not. And we need to recognize that. I should mention this perspective too, that we shouldn't think that there's a silver bullet here. We shouldn't ask our policymakers to just put forward one or two solutions and expect to apply them everywhere, because that will not work. I'm meeting customers on a regular basis, and they look at their conditions, they look at their existing assets, the fact that they have invested in, as in our case, heavily in a gas-based supply chain. It's not an easy thing for a big industry to change to electrification, so easily. So that needs to be recognized by policymakers. And also in that context, I think it is worthwhile mentioning the dilemma that we are in now in Europe. Since a few years back, we have an increased focus on competitiveness, on affordability, and on the fact that the energy needs to be cheap. That is really at core of every customer discussion out there today. It must be remembered also from a policy-making perspective. And picking up on the discussion on the point that you made here, Jean-Christophe, on demand side, we need to make sure to keep the ETS, the EU ETS system intact. A few voices have been heard and raised the last few weeks about a reduced impact of the ETS system in terms of transitioning European industry. And let me just say that this system has been around for 25 years. It is at the core of global warming and climate change mitigation in Europe. So we must really support that. Meva Energy, as well as a number of other green tech scale-ups and also more mature business, are relying on that system to be there to support the demand side of it. So that needs to be said in this context, I think.
Yeah, so thanks for mentioning that ETS part of the storyline. We might circle back on that, in fact, because we've mentioned affordability before. There's a lot of links that we can unpack there. But I want to close our first round by going to Francesco and staying on the molecule side of this story, because of course, you're Chief Transition and Financial Officer from Eni, from an oil and gas major. Tell us a bit about the evolution of thinking on transition infrastructure. Especially in light of carbon neutrality goals of Europe, your company's own. What is in store there?
First of all, it is important to understand that energy is not a name that is singular, but is plural. Because the energy is just an element that is what you need to satisfy the uses that you have to do in your life. So there are energy sources or vectors. Electrons are vectors, other are sources that are fitting for the different scope. So electrons are very good if you want to transfer data, if you want to cool down. It's difficult to use molecule to cool down because you are generating heat, so it's the wrong side to move to reduce temperature. It's good for lightning or enlightening. While once you move to molecules is, let's say, has different logical physical principle. So molecules, carbon is molecules that try to create links. As soon as it's possible, it's linked to another molecules. So it's good for building. On the other side, the molecules release a lot of energy once they are cooked. So for cooking, for creating or building stuff, for transforming. Think that from hydrocarbon, you build the fertilizer. Probably almost over five of people in the world will not survive without the support of artificial fertilizing. So all this stuff is something that cannot be forgotten. It is essential for human being and improvement of our lifestyle. Unfortunately, we had a narrative in the last 5-7 years where everything was focused on electrons. Electrons and renewable electrons, so even a specific side of electrons, because clearly you remove the fossil side of the electron. Because once you decide to have this transformation, this is an addition, is an improvement, is an efficiency, is something that could be absolutely necessary, but on the other side requires, for example, new tools, new engines, new machines, and this have to be done by molecules. You requires backup that is done by molecules, and substantially you require industry. that use these tools, they use these molecules to transform and generate the new cars, electrical cars, or the other stuff related to transition, the windmill, etc. So the idea that we can, let's say, skip away from molecules and hydrocarbon as a consequence is, unfortunately, is a naive approach to transition. Transition requires energy, requires molecules, cheap molecules, requires industrialization, and this is a word that in Europe became extremely negative in terms of content, and requires, as much as possible, decarbonized molecules. Decarbonized molecules means that you use all the tools that technology will provide you, and technology is not a fixed element. Technology is changing every day. 5 years ago, 4 years ago, nobody of us was hearing about ChatGPT. There was 1 or 2 versions at the time. Now ChatGPT is practically used by all of us every day. And this is a new source of technology that is potentially adding more efficiency, but also adding much more consumption, changing the pattern of the, again, electrons use in the future. So we have to be open-minded. We were not in the past. We had to find all the solution. We had to buy time. So if there is a good solution for the short term, as the offset, we should use it. If there is a carbon capture for hard-to-abate industry, we should use it. And on the other side, building the alternative and the other technology that will improve the renewable side of the overall spectrum. So this is where we have to invest, and this is what actually, as an energy company, not a molecule, let's say, lover in a sense, but they say that we are substantially selling what the market requires. We continue to invest on the both sides of this war. Just as a last figure, electrons cover just 20% of the primary energy consumption. So there is still 80% that comes from something else.
Thanks for illustrating, in fact, the complexity of that. Markus, please do comment.
Yeah, just reflecting on that, and again, you asked about the Nordic experience. So reflecting on the point that Francesco just raised. So in Nordics, we have had long-term technology-neutral policies. So accepting that the change takes a long time and that you have to accept and you have to make room for solutions. And the enormity is really big. So to get to the EU's climate targets, we need twice the amount of electricity, and all of that needs to be clean. And we would need half of the molecules we have today, and all of those would have to be clean. Are we explaining this to the European voters, what it means in land use, volatility, grid expansion, costs, how life is changing, how our daily life is changing? I don't think we have done a perfect job in that. But time is needed. Then also on national level, governments need to either commit to the change or then in EU have the discussion that so what are the timelines, what are the steepness of the change curves if we don't realistically, if we're not going to make it or don't want to make it, what are the consequences? But we can't have a narrative where we say that something is going to happen and then we don't actually follow track.
Now, here I'd like to stay with you, Markus, to pick up on what we've heard already in the panel. Affordability, the competitiveness aspect, another word that we hear every day, the necessity to address those issues. Energy pricing is becoming a very politically central issue, from Antwerp to Aldenbiesen to the council in 3 weeks. Their industry is really beating the drums over competitiveness on energy pricing here. Can you speak to us a bit about where policymakers should act, what margin of maneuver they have to bring that particular issue down in the context of this transition journey?
Again, I refer to the Nordic example. So a system that is more than 90% CO2 free is based on hydropower, nuclear power, and high acceptance of renewables, which then means that then industries and consumers will need to flex in order to take the benefit of those low-cost hours. What that means for the continent is that we as an electricity industry we can, and historically we have mobilized hundreds of billions, if not trillions of capital, and that can be done to bring the low-cost electrons into the market. But what that then means is that we need to get PPAs with our customers, we need to make the projects bankable, and then what we can do as Europe, for example EIB, is to enhance the bankability of these investments and get them going through guarantees, through CFDs, risk sharing, long-term loans. Again, I go back to the tripartite, so this can be done. It will take some time, but the investments can be done, and that is the best thing we know as an energy industry, deploying capital and deploy our competencies and technology.
So deploying capital here, Jean-Christophe, on grids, I want to circle back to your point earlier. The grid readiness is important here. EIB is already doing a lot of work on that. Historically, as a sector, we really need to get to parity in investment here. For every euro that's gone to renewables investment in the past decade, only 40 cents in Europe went to grids and storage. So there are historic reasons for this. I'd love to hear actually your views on that, as to why we missed the boat on that. And more particularly, how that now needs to be scaled up. You're doing work on that. How do you see, with the same clarity as you've had in the past few years, to invest more in new clean tech companies, on the generation side, on the demand side? What is to be expected next, specifically on grid infrastructure?
Okay, before I come to your question, I just wanted to echo a little bit what was said on, and just say a word on affordability and competitiveness. You know, I think we shouldn't fool ourselves. Yes, in Europe we have expensive energy compared to many other continents. No, there is no other solution but to continue on the trajectory that we are and to continue to invest in renewables and with a smart mix of whatever molecules will stay in there, because they will indeed continue to be part of the picture, together with other energy sources. Maybe we will talk about small modular reactors as well at some point. But I think what is absolutely clear and crystal clear for us is that whatever we do, rowing back and depending more on fossil fuel is definitely not the way to go. Right?
Stay the course. Yeah.
And we see it with the very unfortunate events that we're having at the moment. And you reminded us of the futures prices for gas that are a very good translation of that. So that has to be said. So okay, so this all said, what now with grids in particular, where grids are at the intersection between supply and demand side of for electrons, for electricity. I think why has there been potentially an underinvestment? Well, they're also a bit to what you were saying. Electricity demand has been flat for a very long period of time. I mean, frankly, still 2 or 3 years ago, it was not clear that electricity demand was really going to be boosted that much. We haven't been very good at anticipating that demand and at making the investments in advance. And in fairness, it just reflects the fact that economic actors act when they have clarity on the demand side, which remains an issue also for some parts of the electricity market, like for hydrogen, for example. And I think to a certain extent, the grids have actually suffered from that. I would add a second point, which is that grids are very particular because they are managed by monopolists, and that these monopolists sometimes may have had the tendency to also optimize locally for local situations. And now we just also realize that we have a systemic problem. And I'm coming back to my issue on fragmentation, which is very dear to my heart, not only for the energy, but also for many other parts of the European system, including the capital markets. What we see is that with the huge investments going ahead, and the fact that indeed these huge investments are going to trigger a continued pressure upwards on the cost of energy, we cannot afford to continue to plan locally. we must plan globally on a European level, and especially when in some parts of Europe, indeed, it is possible to produce very competitive energy using the local power sources. We must absolutely improve in our ability to start thinking about the system on the European global scale, even though indeed the energy mix is very different in different parts of Europe. We have to absolutely make sure that the cheapest possible energy can find its way where the consumption is actually required. And on this, let's face it, we are still not very good. I mean, I don't know whether any of you has actually seen that amazing picture of how green investments are decided in Europe and the coordination mechanisms, but it's an absolute labyrinth and maze. And you know, there's no wonder that it's difficult for us to actually take supranational decisions on that. On this, we must absolutely continue. So. In short, grids are going to remain absolutely essential. Amongst the grids, one is, and I completely agree with you, we need to push the industrialization agenda, in particular for grids, also at the European level. The deindustrialization of Europe at the moment is becoming absolutely critical. So helping a number of manufacturers to develop the capacity that we need, to develop the cables that we need, to develop the technology and the goods that we need to expand the grid is absolutely critical on the one side. On the other side, we need to absolutely make sure that we develop new solutions for transmission system operators in particular. Because what we see in Europe, I mean, we have increased, as I mentioned earlier on, we have tripled. We have a very large balance sheet, right? $500 billion balance sheet in EIB. We have very large limits on these grid operators in particular because they're very low risk. So as any banks, we have our internal limits, but I can guarantee you in a few years' time, our limits will be reached. The trees do not grow up to the sky. So there is a maximum that even a very large institution like ours can do on transmission system operators and grid operators. So there will have to be a relay with new solutions to finance, including these regulated assets and these grid investments. I mentioned some of them, hybrid solutions to also increase the equity of transmission system operators, financing some of these assets off balance sheet. We need to really start thinking ahead, which means also that the regulation must be adapted to make this off balance sheet solutions and these new novel solution possibilities a reality and something which is readable also for private sector investors.
The importance of grids through industrialization, of course, finding those TSO solutions and getting creative with how we bring in different types of financing in the years to come. I hear those were your main takeaways on what you'll be working on. And to build on that, Dorota, if I can come back to you, because you raised the very important issue of just transitions, perhaps even there's a link to be made there with social acceptance also from the projects that we intend to multiply. I immediately want to think of permitting issues there as well. It still today takes longer to permit a wind plant sometimes than it does to build it. And we have queues of renewable energy waiting to come online. So there's again a big role for countries there. We know that it can be accelerated, but how can we do that? It's been done in other sectors. How can we do it here in particular? What would be your take on that?
Of course, my institution is not responsible for permitting, but we finance a lot of projects, and it takes really a lot of time for permitting and to closing the agreements in the end. What I think is absolutely crucial, first of all, to prepare good projects. I mean, once the projects are really well prepared and you have really the support, and that's why I wanted to mention the Elena support, and we will sign today the agreement with EIB about the support, and thank you very much for this, because really a lot of projects which are in a queue, they are not well prepared, so they do not have support in terms of preparation of concrete documents, in terms of concrete processes, and we want, as the National Fund, also support future beneficiaries with preparing really good projects which will be implemented in a very short period of time. Second point in terms of course, permitting is to increase the number of civil servants which are delivering this sort of services and specifying concrete areas where this support should be implemented. And I know that already in Poland, in terms of many institutions, this goal has been met. But nevertheless, it's still some time to be needed to see the concrete results in terms of shortening the time of permitting. And the third very important point, which we also haven't mentioned before, is the stability of law. If we change the law at the European level, at the country member state level, relatively, how to say, regularly, thank you very much, it does not help to really to deliver permits and to deliver good projects in the end.
So stable laws, in that sense, well-prepared projects, and supporting in that also from the institutional capacity perspective. That's loud and clear. Niclas, maybe moving back to you from your clean tech perspective here. We know from the Draghi report that Europe has a scale-up problem. It doesn't have a startup problem, we have a scale-up problem. And the Clean Industrial Deal, in fact, now a year old, sees clean tech competitors or companies like yourselves as a building block in that. That requires financing, it requires ecosystems to give those clean techs wings and maybe essentially make 1,000 clean techs bloom, right, in that regard. What would be, from your experience, the advice you'd give here to policymakers to make clean techs really take off in that field that you're defending so well?
Right. Oh, very broad question, isn't it? May I just pick up on what Dorota said? Absolutely. Giving us a reminder here, the importance to prepare your documents before you file for a permit in Poland. We did that. And we failed the deadline with 1 day. So we've learned that lesson for sure. And that lesson is even harder to make for a young company, for a scale-up company, you know? So being subjected to the rigidity of regulatory frameworks, this is now coming back to your question, Anna, is more difficult for young companies that do not have the infrastructure, that do not necessarily have their own compliance officer, for instance. You need to make sure that you have good advisors and that you make a sufficient effort understanding the legislation where you are to sit. So that's very clear. There are some good initiatives going on from the Commission, in particular the 28th regime, which has been quite a lot talked about already. That is the idea that as a scale-up company, you would have, as an impact scale-up at least, you would have a certain legal status and be able to have a fast track in a number of legislations nationally. That would be fantastic if that would come to play. At the end of the day, what can we expect here in terms of time frame to that to be realized? I'm not really too optimistic about that. That's a major change in legislation for a lot of companies, and I think I fear that it will take many years before that can happen. So meanwhile, it is important that Europe continue focus on innovation even more. There are other initiatives here, the Scale Up Fund, for instance. We have a commissioner now that is not only responsible for R&D, but also for entrepreneurship and startup scale-ups. That's fantastic. First thing since a couple of years back. And as you said, this was very much highlighted in the Draghi report. So movements are underway. I think Europe is moving in the right direction. Still need to do a lot in terms of facilitating innovation. One particular data point that probably not a lot of people are aware of is the, in my view, imbalance between how much we spend on academic technology research in comparison with how much we spend on deployment of new technologies, on those new scale-up technologies. The difference is huge. I don't have the figure for the complete EU here, but just looking at my home country, Sweden, 98% of that total bucket of money is being spent on academic technology research. About 2% is being spent on scale-up funding. That's a major problem. And one should question whether that balance is the right one. I'm not saying that academic research necessarily should have less money, but the imbalance is there. If we have identified that we have a problem with scaling up, maybe that is something to discuss and have a conversation about.
A specific point on that scaling up. I see Markus and Jean-Christophe have a comment before I go to Francesco. Markus, please.
Yes, so 2 quick reflections. So on Dorota's point, Poland has been very determined in what it wants. And as Fortum, we have actually businesses in Poland, and we have developed district heating systems in Częstochowa, Zabrze, Płock, Wrocław, to actually match the Polish targets. So we have decarbonized previously very fossil-fired systems to be CO2-free or CO2 neutral. I wanted to build on Niclas's point as well. So on the permitting, also one thing we need to explain to voters and national countries that if we think we're competing against the US and China, then we have quite a disadvantage if we have 27 different regulations. And I take nuclear as an example. So every country has its own nuclear regulation. US has one, China has one. So scaling up is completely different in these areas. And scaling up is then, the modularity is the solution for low-cost new nuclear.
Thank you for that, Jean-Christophe.
Yeah, I had 2 points, and Markus already took my first one, which is indeed what would help our scale-ups, and I'm sure, Niclas, you would agree, is if you had the same standard everywhere, right? Instead of having to learn every time to adapt, especially for young companies and for scale-ups. But my second point was to really reinforce the particular need that you just expressed to position a number of choices in terms of economic policy and economic support mechanisms around this notion of investing into companies that are behind first of a kind. I mean, we have supported really over the years through something that the audience might be fairly familiar with, the venture debt product, which is actually Niclas and his company were supported with, which is a non-dilutive equity type investment. And we have now a portfolio of nearly 10 billion euros on this. And in the clean tech space, what we see in particular is that we have quite a number of companies that now are beyond first of a kind proven technology. And in particular in the clean tech have got a lot of trouble attracting enough capital to grow and to industrialize their solution and to actually project their solution at the industrial level with some of the clients and some of the contracts that they potentially have the capability to generate. So you mentioned the Draghi report. The scale-up issue is a general issue that we have in Europe, but it is particularly acute in the clean tech sector. And I would totally agree with you that we have, I mean, you were saying public institutions should be there to do, the really risky and innovative stuff, but let's not be too restrictive in the way we define innovation and we define market failure. We have a proven market failure in technological deployment when it comes to industrialization. And this is part of the mechanisms that we also as public institutions deploy must be oriented towards that particular market failure, which at the moment is still not really the case, or at least not enough.
So to bridge from that to you, Francesco, here, because we hear about research and development, of course, as necessary, going from startups to the scale-ups beyond the one-of-a-kind level. I can imagine the investment decisions that happen at your side of the table have to do with existing assets, of course, and then the new technologies to be brought online. You highlighted them before, CCUS, hydrogen, there's a lot of different things on the table here. With this as a backdrop, with the discussion on energy prices, with the carbon neutrality goals that Europe has, that your company has, how do you make a distinction between those two? What do the decisions actually then look like based on current, what exists, what needs to be invested in to maintain production, also a reality, and then the new technologies to come online that you're betting on?
Clearly, what you describe is the complexity from the financial point of view of the transition. Transition is substantially a 5-variable equation. You need to ensure environment target, you need to ensure security target, you need to ensure competitiveness for economy and industry. You need to ensure social affordability, and you need to deploy technology at the best of the different options. So this is the overall spectrum. Actually, so far, I think that the recipe we adopted was just to pick one of these variables and to concentrate just the result on that specific variables. Environment, and eventually something else, and trying to, we never thought on a maximum balance between these 5 variables. Actually, once we work as an oil company, energy company, in the transformation that we did, we try to keep all these variables in account because we work with different countries. We are exposed to Africa, we are exposed to Europe, we are exposed to Far East. We are exposed differently in different technology, and we have to move towards new technology. So we are probably also one of the largest investors in nuclear fusion, for example. And this without relying on public support or government support. This is just the way we work is substantially to think all these different targets or different business opportunity as a standalone, able to finance itself. So I don't use the pocket, for example, generated by the upstream business or by the legacy business. I think this business have to continue to invest. Is impacted by a natural decline, so you have to invest to keep even the same level. And if I want to grow, I have to invest a bit more. So I need to use the cash generated from that business in that business. And I need to find a way to finance the new business by using something else that is substantially as was described. There is a lot of opportunity. The market is rich of savings, looks for opportunity, looks for good assets, a good company where to bet and to put the money in. And they are paying a very interesting multiple to the growing business relating to transition. So you have to present this business. We create the concept of satellites. So for us, the transition is a transition from an integrated model, the Rockefeller model that was following the molecule from the birth to the death, so from the well to the refinery, to a cosmopolitan model, to a satellite where there is clearly the upstream, there is renewables, there is CCS, and there is, in these different businesses, different logic in terms of financing, different bankability, different metric, different partner. I do not work with the traditional majors or NOC. If I want to work in this, there is private equity that likes to invest in this business. And we have to be flexible from the point of view of contractual capacity, or from the point of view of being able to accept a certain degree of, let's say, of distance between what you were used to be in a traditional integrated measure instead of this different approach. And I think that it works. It works because it doesn't sacrifice one of the various goals in order to reach just one of the main target. In this way, we are able to improve and to grow, for example, almost for 6 gigawatt of capacity in 5 years. We are the second renewable capacity. We are the second player in terms of biofuel. We are the first player probably in terms of CCS in Europe. And as I mentioned, one of the most exposed. And with depth that was lowered in the meantime. And we continue to grow in the upstream. So this is the recipe. We are not, let's say, splitting the world in good and bad. The world of energy is good for humanity. It's good because the humanity needs energy in different sources with different mix, and you have to be able to provide that mix in the best possible way, economically, environmentally, and from the safety point of view.
Yes, and in that respect, you bring us back full circle to where we started, the complexity of the sector and what it means in terms of different speeds, different partners, different implications for who you start projects with, where the financing comes from, and how that goes forward. Now, as a moderator, I could keep asking questions clearly for a very long time, but I do have to share with the audience, and I want to create some space for that, because we've heard from our panelists here. I would like to open the floor for questions with the remaining time that we have together before I try to wrap up our conversation here. So I'm looking towards our EIB colleagues who have very kindly helped us out in the first one. I see a question in the back and a question over there. Could I just kindly ask you to stand up state your name and where you're coming from, and a clear question for our panelists. I have 2 questions here. Well, the gentleman first. You were right.
If it's okay with you, of course. My name is Eugen Pajić-Karega. I'm the CEO of Dalekovod PLC from Croatia. So the company that is building overhead transmission lines since 1949. And basically, listening not only today, basically the problem of building an overhead transmission line, especially of the high voltage, all the problems that we have today, because the average time to market is between 10 to 15 years, as we all know. And we are coming back to all the problems of permitting, etc., and projecting and building itself. But basically, my question is, in Croatia and basically in ex-Yugoslavia, the 400 kV transmission line network was built 50 years ago. And basically, within the couple of years, so I think that was from the idea to the realization was 7 years. Okay, I understand. It was a communist country. Probably nobody was taking care about landowners and environmental issues, etc., etc. But we, all those, as in Western Europe, have those networks today that brought, at the end of the day, I'm quite sure, positive social benefits or social value to all of us today. So my question to the whomever panelists want to take the question: how can we build from those benefits to today's basically creating, as one of the panelists says, positive social let's say, feelings around building all those networks or grids that we need today?
Very clear. Thank you for the question. How do we go from previous existing outdated and old infrastructure to the mature new infrastructure? Who would like to take that question? Markus, please.
Yeah, so this is the dilemma that it takes 10, 15 years, and it is exactly a question of actually getting people who own land, whose land has to be bought or taken over. So how do you do that? And at the same time, if you have the need for an investment at the other end of the line, the companies are not going to wait for 10 years. The business case is gone already by that time. So the way we have solved it in our end is that we recognize this, and we see that our customers need the access to power much, much faster than that. So we have started to zone the sites and permit the sites in advance, generically, without knowing exactly what kind of activity will come there. And we work very closely with the transmission system operators to find where is there redundancy on the grid, and then start acquiring land 1 to 2 kilometers from substations. So and then pre-agree already with the landowners a couple of years in advance that is it okay to then get the right to pass through your land. And this is my recommendation to regions, cities, municipalities, and countries to actually do that. Otherwise, it's very difficult to solve the problem. So think in advance, think what you want in which place, and build redundancy in the system that can then be utilized when it's needed.
Thank you very much for the question on grid planning. I saw there was a question in the back over there, if I may. Yes, please.
Yes, I'm Eva Schwab from FEANSA, that's the European Federation of Organizations working with the homeless, and I'm working on energy poverty. I wanted to take up the thread on just transition and ask you a question. So the EIB has now quite an important role in handing out the first ETS2 revenues with the front-loading facility. And we see a lot of resistance in the member states, particularly in Central Eastern Europe, against adopting the ETS system for fear of social impacts in households. And we know from Eurostat there are around 14% of European households who live in buildings with leaky roofs and drafty windows. So that is not the first buildings that you think of when you imagine these flexibilized electricity markets that also your colleague from Eurelectric has been talking about. These households are simply not able to participate in that and will probably bear the higher costs then. So my question is, how to make sure that the front-loading facility is going to really reach the households who live in these leaky buildings, and especially also with a view to the report by Danuše Nerudova, who proposes now to exempt the building sector from the ETS too. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for the question. Who would like to take that?
Well,
Jean-Christophe.
I can say a word about this indeed, and thank you very much for putting the question also in the broader context. And first of all, since you have commented on it, indeed, one of the things we have recently decided is to put money available to member states in order to front-load the social programs that will be deployed by member states in anticipation of the credits generated by the ETS2 system. And it's actually not the first time we are doing something similar. We have also, in the context of the just transition mechanism, we have partnered there also with the European budget to have blended finance mechanisms that allow to smoothen the cost of finance for a number of social objectives. I think when it works well is when there is a good symbiosis between the wholesale bulk finance that we provide as a European institution and the use of that finance locally by regional and national, generally regional governments. So the role, when it works well, is when we can actually lean on our scale as a European institution to provide bulk finance at conditions that are difficult to get regionally, combine them with a number of these mechanisms, whether they are the just transition mechanism, the number of grants. It can also be sometimes other things like technical assistance to prepare the projects that you have referred to, one of the initiatives, and where we then lean on effective government, local government and regional government action. So I think you have mentioned some of these mechanisms. We will continue to deploy them at European scale to make also sure that there is a level playing field in Europe, that no member states is comparatively advantaged compared to others, and try to continue to partner with regional authorities to make that work.
Thank you. I know we're out of time, but Markus has one final comment that you'd still like to add to this.
To the question about energy poverty, yes. So extremely important question. So in Fortum we have 2.2 million customers, a lot of students, small households with low income, and how can we help our customers, especially with low or unpredictable incomes? So one is what we can do as companies is to provide visibility into the pricing with fixed price contracts. So today we offer a fixed contract at 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour, taxing like the VAT included. What governments can do is to be reasonable on the taxation on energy. In Finland it's 2.5 cents. It can be 5 cents, 10 cents, it can be even more across Europe. So this is what governments can do. And then to make it possible to get the electricity contracts, to give guarantees to people actually who otherwise cannot even get a contract or cannot get the fixed contract. So a very topical thing. How I personally engage is I weekly talk with in our call center with our sales agents and ask what are our customers saying, what are the customers' problems that they are facing. So very acutely on my agenda every week.
Thank you so much for the final touch. We're wrapping up our panel just now. Please do join me in a round of applause for our fantastic panelists. Thank you. And thank you for the questions.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you very, very much for a wonderful panel discussion. I won't take your time because I know we're over time, but we're going to start back on time. So it's a coffee break and we'll recommence at 4:45.